Our speaker this morning, Finn Torjeson. But before I do that, I want to introduce two other guests that we have, missionaries that are in for the Missions Festival week. Matt Finnegar and his wife Laura are here in town. And Matt, if you stand up, we at least get you to stand up. Burn a little calories this morning. And then also want to introduce and we can welcome Roger File, who's from the Philippines this morning. Let's welcome them. Finn and Sandy Torjeson are from this church, and Finn grew up in Taiwan where he was a missionary kid, and he was also on staff here at this church back in the 70s as a youth pastor here. And Finn and Sandy were first assigned to go to Taiwan in Asia, and they served there before they had a really unique opportunity. Finn's grandfather was serving in Shaanxi province, China, and in 1939 he was killed by Japanese dive bombers as they were coming in during World War II. And so in 1990-91, the Chinese government gave a special invitation to Finn and Sandy to come and to continue the missionary work that his grandfather had started some 50 years earlier. And so God has really grown the ministry of Evergreen Family Friendship Service there to include 20 Chinese staff, 30 Chinese staff, and a number of, how many expats? Maybe I'll let Finn introduce it. But anyway, they're involved in a lot of unique ministries of medical, teaching English, business consulting, and obviously working with the church and sharing Christ as they do all these things. But let's welcome Finn here this morning.
Yeah, okay. I was real comfortable until I walked in this morning and I saw Bob Liu. I have to introduce another guest. He's worked there in China for many years as a doctor down in Yunnan, and he's visited up at our work, so I have to be careful now what I say. So it's real upsetting. I love it when I come to a group that no one's ever been in China, because then I can say anything. How many of you have been in China? Just to really upset myself. Okay, there's 5 or 6. Very good, very good. I hope all of you in the next 10 years will get there. You need to, because you need to prepare your kids and your grandkids to understand why they're going to have to learn Chinese. In the next 5 years, probably more than 50% of the internet will be in Chinese. And there's a few other details and facts that you might want to know about in the near future about China. So come on over and visit. Now this morning, I have a half hour and I want to share with you a lot of stories, a lot of things that are going on in China, but I want it to be based on a central theme. And that theme is risk aversion. Evergreen has grown, as Matt has said. We've got about 60 staff now, 5 in the States, 25 foreigners in China, and about 30 Chinese staff, plus 20-some kids in our organization. And I'm supposedly the leader. I have no training in management. I have no experience in leadership other than what God throws in our way. So I've been taking these courses. Rutgers University is doing a program in Beijing. They've been doing it for the last 6-7 years, giving MBAs, executive MBAs. So I was able to get into the program. And there was a Christian man that I didn't find out he was a Christian until the last day of the class, teaching on negotiation and leadership. Grant Ackerman, some of you might know of him. He taught this course, and one of the things that he did was test for our risk aversion. And I didn't even know what that word meant before. Now, when you're dealing with other people's money or property, you're supposed to be risk averse, right? Supposedly. And so he was testing, and the 35 of us in the class, I came out the least risk averse. And he looked at me and he said, "I feel sorry for your staff." And I've been thinking about that. And in the last few months, I've been teaching through the book of Acts. And in Acts 4, as the church has gone through this growing spirit, they're really communists there in Acts. I just love it, living in China and to be able to read Acts and see how communism really got started there in the early church, all working together. Does that feel comfortable, you hearing me say that? I wonder, sometimes in Indonesia, with the Indonesian culture, where we were for 9 years, and now in China with the Chinese culture, sometimes it's easier to present some of the principles of Christianity to the people when they have had a background of struggling to find out ways to serve each other, to be selfless to each other. One of the phrases that we often get in China is the officials will come to us and say, "How come you're better communists than we are?" And we say, what do you mean? They say, you take care of each other, you love each other, you do all these selfless things, and that's what we were supposed to do. That was our philosophy, but no one does it. Everybody just lives for themselves. So, back to the risk aversion in Acts there. In Acts 4, it talks about the apostles and the disciples as they're going through all the struggles. The church is growing, but there's difficulties, and soon they're going to have that dispersion all over. Their prayer is for boldness, that God would give them boldness in speaking. And as we learn about what missionaries do around the world in different places, it shouldn't be, wow, I wish I was there, or wow, I wish we could do that. It should be, wow, how can that make me bold to do what I'm called to do wherever I am? And so as I tell the stories of China and some of the things that are going on there and the struggles or excitements we have, really what I want is that we would be bold before God and that we would be not risk averse. What's the reverse of risk aversion? It's risk-taking. We'd be risk-taking not with other people's property and money, but with the life God's given us. God's given us one life here, and we should not be risk-averse with that life. And it reminds me of the story of the talent being buried. We need to take that talent out and multiply it all over the place. So how to be risk-taking for God. In the last 10 years in our time in China, we have been overwhelmed by what God is doing there in so many different ways. And I'd love to tell you a lot of stories of the past, but I want to focus on just the most recent and where he seems to be taking us. Because these are areas that I'm a little bit nervous about, and I'm not sure how they're going to work. And our staff, as we've grown, has built policy books, handbooks, and we're starting to get comfortable with where we are. Bob, don't listen to this because we're supposed to be aggressive, and we're starting to slow down. We've figured out how to do things in China, so we don't like all the new things happening because it messes us up and gets us breaking out of our box that we've already started to build there. But in the last 3 or 4 years, a number of our staff have been talking about who's working with the young people. The church doesn't have a time to do, their young people's meetings have people up to 60 years of age in them. That's young in China. And they don't really have, it's still 2 hours of lecturing and preaching and very little in the way of really reaching out to the youth in the community. So we've been struggling with how do we get into youth work? Well, in these last 3 years, God has just moved ahead, and it's like he planted that idea in our minds. We've had a connection with Australia, and right now today, we're ending a trip today with 3 of our staff are in Australia now, following up 4 years of work where we're visited every year, and many of these Australian young people that we're working with have come to work in China for short term, and they are now preparing to send out 11 people from Australia to work full-time with Evergreen. You know what full-time with Evergreen is? It's 10 years. 10 years. Now, we haven't had that, we've only been there 10 years, so I don't know how we're going to measure that and all. And that's actually, we actually call that short term, is 10 years. So long term would be what? Life. We wish. In China, with 5,000 years of history, one life isn't very long term. We say 3 generations. You pray in either your kids or somebody else's kids, or you find and train other missionaries to come out. So we talk long term as 3 generations, just to get your thinking more in terms of the realities of China and the 5,000 years of history. So this youth work has been developing. God's starting to send us people, these Australians that are just crazy. They are willing to do anything. We have one guy who's a medical doctor. He's gone back and done 4 years of theological studies, and all he wants to do is do youth work. And our doctors in China are very upset. And they said, no, if you come out here, you're doing medical work. And he said, no, I'm coming out and doing youth work. And that's what God's called me to do, and we're going to try and find a way to do it. So now they want to come out, but we're not sure how we're going to do it. We don't have really the connections. I'm up visiting where my grandfather worked. It's a small village called Hechu, and it's small in China means the county of Hechu has maybe 200,000 people. So that's a smaller county. The town of Hechu has about 40,000 people, so that's considered a real small town. And it's on the Yellow River, where the Great Wall of China comes through the Yellow River, splitting Inner Mongolia and Shanxi province. And we're there, and the Communist Party leader, whose father used to be my grandfather's goat herd, he and I have been going at each other for a long time, and I'm always accusing him of being a lousy leader for his county because he doesn't have a church in the county yet. And he's just not come up to par. He's been chosen. They had the first popular democratic election of a county party secretary in China was in that county about 6-7 years ago. And so he's actually a very model leader in a model county, but we always rib him. And so about 2-3 years ago, he said to me, okay, Finn, where your father's monument is, we want you to buy that land. We'll give you a special deal on it. And on that land, we want you to separate a little bit of land out, and we want you to build a church. so that we have a church in our county. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. He said, look at me. Wait a minute. You've been pushing all these years to get a church. Now you've got it. I've given you the land practically. You're going to have to build it. I said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go into town. We're going to find the Christian leaders here. We're going to send a bunch of them down for training in Taiyuan. They're going to develop their own committee. And if they want to build a church, they're going to build a church on that land, and we'll give it to them. And so he got, oh, that's how you guys work. I said, no, that's how you communists told us to work, and it's actually the right way. And because the three-self church is self-propagating, self-managing, self-supporting. And so it's a very good concept if it's used right. So we were able to push that back on them. So we have this opportunity for a beautiful piece of land. The back of the land is up against the Great Wall of China, and it looks out over the Yellow River. So kind of a nice setting for a youth camp or a youth center. And he's trying to sell it to me. So I'm back in the States 3 weeks ago. I'm in Cedar Falls, Iowa. There's very little in Cedar Falls, Iowa, except University of Northern Iowa, which some of you maybe, anybody gone to UNI? Good, I can say anything I want. I'm there, and I'm speaking in a church, and at the end of the time talking, I went out into the foyer, and this guy comes running out and practically tackles me. He said, I'm from somewhere in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, but he said, I'm stationed up here in Cedar Falls, Iowa, where we're heading up Signature Ministries. He said, my job is to provide technology for camps. I do rope courses, and I do all kinds of these other courses, and I've just been hired by Chaminade Camp in Minnesota, the Free Church Camp up in Minnesota. Chaminade? And they have just been contracted by somebody in China, a government agency in China, to start camps in China. Can we work together? You know, we can talk about being bold and going out, but God is playing all the moves, and we just need to be ready to move with Him. I don't know what's happening next, but it is so fun to say, yes, I'll try, and go out and see what He does. A few years ago, we were approached by a number of publishing houses, Cook Communications, International Bible Society, and they said, we're trying to get into China. We've been reviewing, assessing our whole life in publishing, where it's going in the electronic world, where it's going in the global world, and we realized we have to get into China. And we've been told to talk with you folks. How do we get into China? And we said, listen, today in China, there's still a lot of underground work going on, but in 10 years, 20 years, if you're not involved with the legitimate government rule by law work in China, you're going to be out in the cold. You need to establish legitimate connections in China and develop your work. Well, Cook Communications came in and they started meeting with Nanjing officials. They started meeting with all these church officials, and I'll tell you, they're kind of depressing at times. It's you go 3 steps forward and 5 steps back often with these groups because they don't have that vision and the push as much as we would like. But Cook worked with it anyway. They established a bunch of relations. Today, and the reason I brought all these things up is I want you to see some of these things that are happening in China. Today in China, Cook has, let me start passing this around. This is a little picture book that has about 200 Bible stories in paraphrase in English and Chinese with a picture. This is becoming one of the strongest evangelistic tools to adults in China. This is not sold by the church. This is sold commercially because it's not the Bible, it's paraphrases of the Bible. And Cook was able to get it published in China legally with an ISBN number, and it's being printed all over China. It was so successful that the Chinese church came to Cook and said, can we publish it instead of you guys? And Cook said, absolutely, that's actually what we want. So they are now helping the Chinese companies publish Christian books in the secular press. And so it's just understanding the systems in China. They have now 30 titles that they're able to publish in China, and they're working on that. They ran into a couple of their titles in southwest China, somewhere in China where they're going through. Some of their material was already being pirated by different Chinese underground or house church movements. And so when they finally got contacted, these house church movements realized that here's the publishing house that they were pirating of their books. They got nervous. And Cook said to them, no, this is a sign that these books are well needed. We will now work with you. We'll help you get the license for it. We'll help you get the original plates. And it was that kind of spirit that opened up all kinds of opportunity. Today in China, there are 35 million Bibles that have been printed in China. The first 600,000 Bibles that were printed, a friend of ours, Peter McGinnis, helped start the press back in '87 in Nanjing. And he told me that the first series of Bibles, they had permission to print about 500,000 plus Bibles, and they didn't have paper. They were getting paper from Finland, and the paper hadn't come in yet. So do you know where the first 500,000 Bibles in China came from, where the paper came from? The PLA. People's Liberation Army had their own press, and they had the quality of paper that was needed, and they didn't care if someone bought their paper and used it. In China, everything is economics. So even to print the Bible, the People's Liberation Army will help do that. Now, business side. The Bible in China is very popular. There's probably been 60, 70 million Bibles given away or sold or distributed in China. There's probably about 50 million to 60 million Christians in China. There might be actually a lot more Bibles than that with all that have been smuggled in. What is happening now in the mid-80s to the mid-90s, the warehouses of Bibles, as soon as you filled up a warehouse, it was empty. They were distributed so fast. In the last 3 years, the warehouses haven't been emptying. And so the warehouses, they maintain them about half full, and they empty slowly now. It means the saturation point is happening. And so, just as a word to the wise, for the future, Bible smuggling is not really needed in China. If you want to do that, that's fine. But I would prefer the $5 you spend on a Bible to smuggle into China, you send us, we can get 5 Bibles in China for that price and distribute them. So if you want to get into Bible smuggling, please let us smuggle Bibles out of China for you so they're cheaper, and then you can smuggle them back in and save a lot of money. Much more efficient. Is that, are you able to get Bibles in Yunnan? Yeah. Well, they have the Union translation, which is the one the church accepts. And it's sort of a little bit of the King James theory, the syndrome in China. They have not been willing to, we've done surveys among the Christians in China, they're not willing to give up their King James, which is the Union version of the Bible. Another area that we're starting to look at getting into in China, we're not sure how it's going to work, and I just ran into a family that's connected to counseling in Yunnan, Philip Tsai. You know Philip and what's his wife's name, Esther? No, Kathy Tsai. Right, I just ran into, their daughter, Jean Tsai, is coming to work with Evergreen for 6 months on an internship with Wheaton's Hunger Program, and I went to meet with her to find out how she, help her prepare and do some orientation for her. Found out she was these friends from Taiwan. And her mom and dad are working down in Yunnan in counseling. This is an area in China that they don't have at all. Pastoral counseling and the whole area of ministering to people's psychological needs is almost unknown. And so God is bringing together teams of counselors in different parts of the countries. But how does a foreigner counsel a Chinese? I mean, for you here, if you were to go to a Korean counselor who barely speaks English and hasn't lived in this country for more than 5 years, how open can you be to share all your inner heart? It's tough. So our job is really to train the Chinese pastors and the Chinese leaders in counseling. Well, God did a miracle for us in Evergreen. We had involvement with ELCA. Any good Lutherans here? Evangelical, any Norwegians here? You're all old Lutherans. Come on, guys. We're working with the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. They've sent us a staff member. And they had another staff member that was down in South China teaching English and having a terrible time with the school she was with. And so they said, can you guys take her up in your area, get her a job teaching in the university there? Well, when she came up, we discovered who she was. She had been the superintendent of schools for the Columbine district when Columbine had the shootings. And her area of responsibility, she was one of the assistant superintendents. Her area of responsibility was the counseling and psychological issues. And so she had to oversee all the counseling of the students, of the teachers, making sure the families and the community were involved with serious counseling care. Then one of the shooters was from her church. So she herself went through a terrible traumatic time and felt God was calling her overseas to a peaceful, quiet place like China. Mark, where are you? Mark Field. Oh, my goodness. Okay, well, I'll save the story till later. So she came to China, and she is now working with others, connecting with others. And now that I know about Philip Tsai doing the counseling in Yunnan, we need to connect her with that. That's a whole other area that God is opening up the doors for us to try and get into, where we will work with pastors in the Bible schools and try and train them in pastoral counseling issues so they can get in. Now, what are the big issues of counseling in China? You all know about the persecution of some of the church Christians or church leaders. You know about the one-child family. You know about what other issues are in China that you're aware of. Abortion. Is it SARS, AIDS? A lot of different things. And the churches aren't prepared to deal with it. They don't have focus on the family there in China. They don't have all the different counseling resources that we have to go to. And yet, what is exciting is the Chinese government realizes this too. And today in China, there is a movement on the national level with the national government, very seldom seen on the provincial level, but the national government leader is starting now to recruit Christian organizations to come in and help them with projects. Let me give you a list of the ones I know of as of now. ECFA, Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, started here in the Wheaton area, I believe, back in the 70s, to help Christian organizations account to each other and be accountable to each other. It's become a very standardized program. There's over 1,000, how many? Well, I can't remember. Over 1,000 organizations that are part of the ECFA for accountability. They have been asked by the Chinese government to come up and set up a similar kind of thing in China. So the ECFA is working with the Chinese national government to start accountability structures there in China. There's a foundation called the McClellan Foundation. Tom McCulley from there has been working with Team Resource, a group out of Atlanta, Georgia, more Atlanta stuff, Atlanta, Georgia, to go and consult with China's interior ministry to do, or civil affairs ministry, to train them in how to start nonprofit organizations. How do you train nonprofit organizations? How do you measure them? How do you license them? And they came to Team Resource and they said, we know you normally do 6-month and 1-year contracts to consult with different Christian organizations. In China, we want you to promise us a 5-year contract because we want your kind of values. They are coming specifically to Christian organizations asking for this. And these groups are coming in. Now, I'm just sitting next to Levi. Tell me, what is it you just told me earlier about Awanas? Working with the government. Why is this happening? We talk about being bold. We're being dragged along by the Chinese government to come and do the gospel. What's going on? God is working. And I think what gives us boldness is not thinking I can do it. It's knowing that God's working. And in all our lives, now we have the pure pleasure of seeing God work in China. I lived in Indonesia for 10 years and then worked in Taiwan for a number of years. You don't always see God's hand so clearly. But when you do see it, it's not to say, boy, I want to join everybody. Actually, I'd have a problem if you all joined us in China. But it would be great if some of you did. But the point is, when you see God's hand in one place, you will remember again how good God is working all over the world and in your life. And to remember, our boldness doesn't come from our own skills and abilities. It's an awareness that God is alive and God is working and God has His plan. My grandfather got killed 70, 80 years ago in China. 70 years ago in China. It didn't look like God was working in those days. But it's because of that bomb that blew him up that opened the doors for us to be able to get in there. Today, now the government is inviting us to come and be more aggressive, to share our values. Do they all want to become Christians? Not really. There might be a day that they do become Christians, and some of them are open to the gospel. We're hearing of Chinese that come to America now are so open and so ready. They're basically asking me, show me that Bible and tell me what I'm supposed to do to believe. They are so soft and ready in many ways. But in China, it's still slow as far as conversions to Christianity, except within the Chinese church itself. 60 million Christians in China. We don't know what the figure really is. It could be 50 million, could be 100 million. But 60 million Christians in China, where did they all come from? Were they the missionaries that led them all to the Lord? In 1949, there were 800,000 Christians in China. 55 years later, there's 60 million. It's an indigenous movement happening in China now. And we get to be a part of it on the side. We do not want to go in and run the church for them. We want to go in and stand with them. I want to share what I closed with last Tuesday night in the seminar here, so sorry folks that heard that, you got to hear it again. A pastor of mine in China, a friend of mine, told me, he said, Finn, when you go back to the States, please preach these sermons. And he gave me a list of sermons to preach that he liked, and I said, okay, why don't you just come and preach them? But he can't get a passport yet. But he said, please preach the sermon about the Good Samaritan. He said, the Good Samaritan, there were 3 people that came along the road and saw this man wounded, and only the third one really helped him. But there was really a 4th man too, and he was an American. That 4th man came along the road, and when he saw the wounded man by the side of the road, he ran back to Jericho, not because he was afraid, but because he was angry. And he ran back to Jericho, and he found the police. He got Mark Fields, and he got the others, and they put together a posse, and they went out and hunted out the bandits that hurt the man on the side of the road, and they solved the problem. But the real problem was the man was still on the side of the road. And the Chinese church has said, please come and just stand with us. Be our friend. Be our network. Be our connection. And if you would just stand here and be openly Christian and be supportive and encourage us, we are so satisfied. You don't have to go to your government and to other governments and solve all our problems. Another message he asked me to share was from Moses. He said Moses had 40 years in the temple of Pharaoh, in the palace of Pharaoh. Those 40 years are like our years with the missionaries before 1949. We lived with the world-class teachers and leaders of the Christian community, and we got trained. Then we had 40 years in the desert. Those were our years under communism, where we had nothing. And like Moses in the desert raising the sheep, at least he found a good wife and a good family there, but they had very little except the Holy Spirit to help them. And so those were the desert years. Said then we had the 40 years traveling through the desert with the children of Israel, the wanderings in the desert. And he said, we are at the point in China where Moses was after he crossed the Red Sea, and they'd had their first few days of treks and weeks and months of treks, and they were going to go into the Holy Lands. But what happened? Did they believe God would really bring them into the Holy Lands? Why did they wander for 40 years in the desert? They weren't ready to take the risk. It was too big of a risk. They couldn't go in. They said, we in China are ready to go into the Holy Lands, and if we don't take that now, guess what? We're going to just wander in the desert for another 40 years, and God will wait for another generation to do it. China is posed to become a Christian nation. God is working in that country. We have the privilege to participate with them, and it is so exciting to see what God is doing. But we are conservative people. We play it safe. We see danger everywhere, don't we? And actually, in China, a lot of the holding back comes from the connection to the Western church. It's a long, complicated formula that happens, but we have a symbiotic relationship where we love to hear persecution stories. We love to hear of all the terrible things that are happening. And so the Chinese communications to them is, if I'm having a conversation with you, I would want to know what is it you want to hear. And I would share with you what you want to hear. And if you want to hear persecution stories, I'll tell you persecution stories. We have about 200 visitors every year that come and see us in China and our work there. And every time I take a group of them to meet a pastor, a Chinese pastor, within the first two questions they ask, it's always about persecution. Well, guess what? The Chinese understand that we want to know about persecution. And so they tell us about persecution. And they tell even stories of 15, 20 years ago, but they won't say they didn't happen that long ago. And that's not the direction they need to go. They are partnering in the fellowship of suffering with Christ. And many of the pastors I meet, they say, we are so privileged to suffer for Christ. And they need to be focused on the Holy Lands that they're going into, the responsibility of leading their countries in Christian value. And this is the direction we want to see China go. Guess what? It's the same thing here in the States. Let's not see the persecution. Let's not see all the negative things that are going on. We have a God that is working. It's already the victor. And there's always a Holy Land out there in front of us for us. Are we going to wander in the desert being risk-averse, risk-averse, risk-averse? It's not somebody else's money we're dealing with. This is the life God has given us. We need to be risk-takers with Him because it's no risk at all. It's just an exciting life. And I'd love to have you all come out to China, enjoy the risk with me. It's quite fun, but you have to learn Chinese and plan to stay at least short-term, 10 years. And or send someone else in your place if you can't come yourself. But come and visit. See what God is doing, because China will be partners with the Christian community around the world and wants to share and help grow the church around the world. Let me close with the vision that the Chinese church has. The Chinese church is swelling with a new movement to go west. Go west, young man, go west. Remember that from the old American frontier? Well, the Chinese are going west to win the Muslim world to Christ. They are going over the mountains, and they're going to go into the stands. Thousands of missionaries are being prepared now by the house churches mainly, but the three self-churches trying to catch up and get involved in it too. And they're going into the stands, and they think because the Americans don't have the best relationship with the Muslim world, maybe God's calling them to reach the Muslim world. And they want to go through the stands and end up in Jerusalem. And basically, it's the old Crusades. Take back Jerusalem and the Holy Land for the Lord, but through evangelism, not through the sword. Pray for China. Pray for us in Evergreen. We'll be praying for you folks. Thanks for this time. If you want some literature and material, they're up here.
Thank you very much, Finn. Really appreciate that. Boy, it's amazing to see what God's doing around the world and in China, too. I had never heard that perspective, so thanks so much for sharing that. Father, it has been a tremendous eye-opening experience this morning to hear about the work that you're doing in China. And that can be replicated around the world. We live in a very, our own lives are so microscopic. Thank you for opening up our eyes, and I just pray that we can see whom you'd have us to touch in our neighborhood and our sphere, and continue to bless Finn and the work that they're doing at Evergreen. Thank you for this breakfast, for the hands that prepared it, for the message we heard, and for your Son, Jesus Christ. It's in His name we pray. Amen.